Okay, so today at Toyo University, we're very fortunate to have with us Donna Brinton. And I would like to say, in my estimation, she's one of the world's leading advocates of content-based language teaching. What do you think about that title? Maybe the world's leading advocate of content-based language teaching.
I'm not sure that I want to take on that mantle of responsibility, but definitely I have a great interest in content-based instruction, and it is probably my main area of interest and expertise.
And not only that, but you've been the leader of this methodology for so many other people. I think in the field of EFL and ESL, the basic debt that is owed to you cannot be repaid in any sense, because you've had a tremendous influence on myself personally. So I feel a debt, but also anywhere I've been to international conferences and discussions with professional teachers who share this interest, we can't go into a conversation for more than 10 minutes without your name coming out in the context of that conversation.
That's very kind of it. For sure, yeah.
It's true. So, with that in mind, we'd like to look at your involvement in content-based teaching over three sort of dimensions. So, the past, the present, and the future.
Okay, sure.
So, thinking about the past, how did this get started for you? And where was the epiphany that teaching through content was going to be a vehicle, that it was going to, probably at the time you weren't thinking it was going to launch your career in that direction,
Definitely not.
But it definitely had something, and it made sense to you. Can you review a little bit of that?
Sort of three things that propelled me into content-based instruction. And the first one happened a long time ago when I was 11 years old. My parents took us to Germany for the year. My father was doing research at a German university, and they had the choice of putting me and my two younger sisters either in an American school or in a German medium school. And they made, I think, the very informed decision, for which I'm very grateful, of putting us in a German medium school. I was in one school, my two sisters were in a different school, so I was the only English native speaker in my entire school. And I spoke about maybe 3 words of German. I knew Guten Tag, I knew Dankeschön, and I probably knew Guten Morgen. And that was the sum total of my German experience. And I sat in my German classes, it was an all-girls school, for about 3 months, understanding next to nothing. And there wasn't a lot of pressure on me because I was actually in a special status where I didn't need to take tests. I was just a guest student for the year. But about 3 months into the experience, in a biology class, I happened to just sort of look up and pay some attention to what the teacher was doing. And she was drawing a big circle on the board with a smaller circle in the middle. And then there was a progression of other circles that became more and more misshapen until they split into 2 smaller circles. And I thought, oh, she's talking about the process of mitosis. And then I thought, well, how do I know that? Well, 2 things. One, I already had knowledge of that topic, and second, I was beginning to understand German. So I sat back and I thought, well, I must be understanding something. I should focus a little bit on how much I understand. And I realized I understood probably about 60 to 70% of what the teacher was saying. And so I am the product of learning language through content. I never had a German class where I was actually studying the language. I learned German through mathematics, through biology, through French class, through music class, art class, and even religion. So that was sort of a formative experience, but at the time I had no idea that this was something that was going to be, my later area of interest. Then the first TESOL conference that I ever attended as a professional in the field was in Mexico City. And there was a professor who was giving a talk whose name was Bernard Mohan, who's actually a big name in content-based. He's responsible for the very first book in the field called Language and Content, published in 1975, I believe. And he gave a talk in which he said the best teachers of language are content teachers. And this was tremendously controversial at the time.
Sure.
I remember everybody in the audience sort of saying, wait a minute, you're trying to put us all out of business. And I took that thought back to UCLA where I was working at the time. And again, it was on the back burner, not anything I was paying a lot of attention to. But in 1978, I was asked by the UCLA administration if I would be willing to participate in an experimental program with high-risk entering UCLA undergraduate students, together with some other English language instructors, including Marguerite Ann Snow, who's one of my most frequent collaborators. And in this experimental program, these high-risk students would attend a summer program where they took one English course and one content course. But those two courses would be linked together, and the English course would serve the purpose of preparing students linguistically for the language demands of the content course. And so we entered into doing this, and without a methodology for doing it, we really had no idea what would work and what wouldn't work. But we pretty much threw away all of our English language textbooks and created our own materials, which I know you're familiar with. And over the course of 8 years, because we did this program for 8 summers in a row, we refined the methodology. We began to present about it at conferences for language teachers, TESOL conferences, other conferences. We gave it a name. We began calling it content-based instruction.
Okay, so you came up with that actual terminology?
I believe that we did, because previously there really wasn't a name. We also were doing a particular model of content-based instruction, which is called the adjunct model. That's not a name that we came up with. That was actually a name that we were given because that was the model that UCLA was implementing. And we began talking to other people about what they were doing and attending conferences, seeing if other people were doing similar things. And we were told that there was a professor at the University of Ottawa who was doing something very, very similar to us. She was teaching, just like us, a language course attached to an introduction to psychology class. And all of the materials she was developing were also for the content area. And we were introduced to her at yet another TESOL conference in New York City, and we talked a little bit about this idea, and we came up with the idea of writing a book about it. So that's the first book that we published. That was Brinton, Snow, and Vesha, Content-Based Second Language Instruction, and the professor from the University of Ottawa was Mari Vesha, so our third co-author on that book.
Right, so, and her background, of course, would have been influenced by immersion studies in the English-French model in Quebec.
Absolutely.
Canada.
And also the fact that a professor from USC by the name of Steve Krashen had done his sabbatical year at the University of Ottawa and had worked with the faculty there on models of implementing language instruction. So, yeah.
Okay. So a lot came together.
A lot came together, yeah.
Fortuitously created this
Kind of movement.
Yeah.
Became a movement, yeah.
So, I mean, do you consider like content-based language teaching an actual, what do you consider to be a method?
An approach.
An approach?
An approach, or really a syllabus for language teaching. It's a way of organizing your language teaching. It's a way of deciding what are you teaching, in which order are you teaching those things, what emphasis are you putting on individual language items within the syllabus. So we actually call it a language syllabus.
Okay. So for me, I see it as an alternative and a way to dispense with prepackaged, commercially available language teaching materials that really never did the job very well. And there was a need for this alternative.
Definitely.
How do you feel?
I would agree. I would agree with that too. I've spent a lot of my life creating materials for students that are within the disciplines and help students with the sort of disciplinary demands of language. And the textbook market hasn't always responded to that need, especially at more advanced levels, because they're not terribly interested in books that address advanced English for academic purposes, since there's a small market for those books and they don't make a lot of money.
No, it's definitely not part of their main marketable strategy. But they also seem somewhat threatened about this idea too, because I've received some comments from at different conferences about, a certain attitude. I've actually pitched it before, the idea of teaching without textbooks. And there have been representatives of publishing houses in the audience. And of course, they want to come up afterwards and challenge this idea.
Sure.
But, I always try and tell them, look, we're talking about a select group of students in a particular program at a particular time. It's not going to threaten your business or your industry.
I don't see it doing that.
Ever.
Yeah.
So, most recently, of course, you've come to Toyo University and you've been involved in teacher training programs here. Now, it's a little bit different than teaching native speakers the methodology, because here you're dealing with Japanese who are basically proficient in English, but may lack confidence in launching into teaching their content in English.
Sure.
So there are a variety of sort of obstacles in their way. And so by working with these people at Toyo University, can you talk a little bit about your impressions of what went on and the kinds of discoveries? Did you see epiphanies taking place inside the classroom regarding some of these ideas?
Well, I just did 2 3-day workshops with content and language faculty from Toyo and from also a few other universities. And in each of the 3-day sessions that I did, we had a mix of language and content faculty. And we also had a mix of sort of previous experiences with doing this. A lot of language faculty, a little bit more aware of different models of content-based instruction. Some content faculty who are currently practicing some form of English medium instruction, but struggling with it a little bit, either because they don't have a background in how to do this, and or because they don't feel their English proficiency is quite up to what they need to do that, or they lack confidence in it. In terms of an epiphany, it's maybe hard to say you can have an epiphany in 3 days of workshops, but we did see a lot of attitudes opening up. I think particularly by having the language and the content faculty discussing issues, and faculty from different disciplines who have different backgrounds in doing this. I had one faculty member in my second workshop who introduced himself by saying, I am currently teaching in English, but my reason for doing this is not that I'm interested in my students learning English. I'm doing it because I want to practice my own English, and I don't care if my students understand me or not. And I think that particular faculty member did go through an epiphany, because we all applauded him on the last day when he said, I recognize that I now have some responsibility for language instruction, and I'm eagerly looking forward to working with some of the language faculty from my campus. It's a different university than Toyo, in collaborating on integrated language and content. So a lot of good things came out of the 3-day workshops. I spent a lot of my time, sort of pushing the idea of why this is happening, what the benefits of it are for students, what the benefits of it are for faculty, and long-term, what the future of this might look like at Japanese universities.
So, speaking with regards to this one individual, he sort of transitioned from a, shall we say, a taker to a giver.
I would say, yeah.
So, and you accomplished that in 3 days. I would say that qualifies
as an epiphany. Okay, well, if that qualifies as an epiphany, we'll accept it as an epiphany, sure.
But, short amount of time, covering a lot, and introducing so many different ideas, and having the 2 sides in the classroom. So you've got the content specialist, you've got the language specialist there, and they're somehow negotiating their boundaries too at the same time and feeding off of that. And do you think that the result of those discussions worked out to some sort of happy sort of relationship or some agreeable boundaries that they could share, or how did that work out?
I think that worked out quite well, actually, with the faculty who were in attendance. And we're talking about a small number of faculty from the universities. So I think these types of seminars or workshops are tremendously important for instilling in faculty an understanding of what they're undertaking. It's very challenging what they're being asked to do, not only to deliver content in a language that maybe they're a little less than confident using, but also in many cases, as the faculty reported to me, they've got very mixed audiences in their classrooms of Japanese learners who have somewhat limited proficiency in English and international students who are more proficient. And this is another challenge that they are all wrestling with. So that's confounding the issue for them and making their lives, I think, quite challenging in a lot of ways.
But that may be the impetus for them to come to the seminar, because
believe
they're
it was,
fumbling with this difficult issue in their own classrooms, and they're looking for solutions.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
And so they're there. They're a great audience to have, because they would represent the greatest of all motivated teachers to benefit.
They were the greatest participants, yeah. They were wonderful.
So just in a general evaluative sense, like, you know, what do you see as like looking towards the future? Like, so we have had these participants here, and you know, are they ready to launch into this? And how do you see this developing over time in Japan, per se? Although, how many times have you been to Japan?
Only three.
3 times.
Three
Okay.
times, yeah. So I'm by no means an expert on what's happening in Japan. In a 3-day workshop like I organized, I think all you can really achieve is raising consciousness of the issues. I wasn't able to go a lot into the specifics of the methodology, of the kinds of materials that would need to be developed, or even the particular instructional strategies that, say, content instructors would need to implement. We talked about sheltering instruction, and we talked about some of the typical things. I made use of video, so we showed some videos of teachers in the US, for example, implementing sheltered instructional techniques, but I would have liked to have done a lot more hands-on activities, maybe having each instructor bring one idea that was working well in his or her class. Those people who are already practicing this, maybe struggling with it, but still have some ideas that they would like to share with others. And I think that would be something that I would like to do on a longer term basis. I think overall sort of more intensive experiences with faculty sharing ideas, with trainers presenting more techniques and more sort of hands-on activities would be what I would think would be very useful.
So if you were to envision, say, like a cert level program, do you think that could be accomplished in, say, 2 weeks of
Really intensive
yeah,
instruction.
like several hours a day, 5 days a week for 2 weeks?
I think that would certainly be a lot more useful for the faculty than a 3-day program. Yeah, so, and I think there's definitely interest in it and need for it, so that would certainly be something to aim for, yeah.
I mean, ideally, you know, the teachers should be responsible to create some tasks
Definitely.
on site and share those.
And maybe
take
even some,
feedback and
I
then
mentioned the
teach
word
those
micro-teaching. I
Yes.
mentioned the word micro-teaching, and, you know, they all turned a little bit pale, but I think in a 2-week seminar, that would be something that you would want to include,
Yes. I mean,
definitely.
everybody's nervous about that because
Sure.
you're, you know,
Mhm.
teaching to your peers
Yeah.
and opening yourself up to that level of sort of review or, in a sense, criticism. But it's a very powerful vehicle to get some very strong feedback, and that's a part of any teacher training program.
And even within the workshops that we did, we had faculty opening up on the final day and saying, well, actually, I'm doing this, and here's a strategy I've been using that worked. And people really excited about hearing about these opportunities. things. So I think that with more time and more familiarity with the participants and sort of everybody opening up a little bit more, I think that that would be easily accomplishable in a 2-week program, for
It's
example.
kind of tragic that on the third day, in
Yeah.
the last few minutes,
Really,
they're
yes.
offering all of these things they were doing, and they waited until the last minute to share that.
One
What
faculty
could have
member
been.
brought in a textbook that she had written that was an integrated language and content textbook, and she brought it on the third day. We circulated it. Everyone was just amazed that she had done work but she didn't feel confident sharing this until day 3. So, yeah.
That's good rationale for extending the
Sure.
length of these
Okay.
training
Yeah.
programs. Okay, well, is there any last message you'd like to share with professional teachers who, not just at Toyo University, but any of our cooperating universities and the people that came? You'll be leaving soon, going back to the States, but if you leave this video message, they'll be able to see it, and they'll be able to access our website. So just a parting message for the participants, or for anybody who may be considering getting involved the next time around.
Well, one of the things I told my participants in the workshops is that we all grow as teachers throughout our careers, and facing a challenge in your instruction is actually one of the main ways that you grow as a teacher. My own experience with content-based instruction is that it's an antidote to teacher burnout, that you get re-energized, you get new ways of presenting material, you take on slightly larger domain that's part of your responsibility for teaching, but it's a very positive thing. And those people in the workshop who had done that all were nodding when I said this, so I think it's a shared, sort of sentiment. I know you share that too, that it's very much a positive force in your life. I don't want to say it changed my life, that sounds maybe a little bit too dramatic, but definitely.
Religious experience.
Yeah, definitely, taking on the responsibility of doing content-based instruction, which I did back in the late 1970s. That's when I first started getting involved in it. I'm still involved in it today because I'm continually learning more things about how to do it more effectively, and it's continued to be a positive force in my own view of teaching and learning. So I think for other teachers, I also say, I encourage you to open yourself up a little bit more to these ideas and see how they maybe could impact your own teaching positively.
And so it's kind of opening the door to unlimited professional growth.
Yeah, I do
It will
believe
serve
that.
you well. Yes, me too.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank
Robert.
you.